Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart.
We are all just walking each other home. 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 We are all just walking each other
It's Sunday morning. Welcome to Fountain Street. My name is Mary Lou Smith, and this church has been an important part of my life since childhood. Today, I'm serving as a representative of the Religious Services Committee, the stalwart group whose members start making summer chapel service plans in January. We do so by locating 10 prospective speakers to present their own sermons here. And throughout the church year, you can give any of us committee members your questions, opinions, and concerns about our worship services, or you could even volunteer to join the committee. Today finds me also serving as clergy substitute. Some of us, again from religious services, agreed to pinch hit this summer on Sundays when regular clergy had other obligations. Please be advised, I do not possess a universal life ministry certificate, nor have I played a minister on TV. But I'll do what I can, beginning with an introduction. Our speaker today is Meredith Bradley, well known by our adult choir due to her work as our membership services representative. She keeps us informed and up to date on everything we need to do and know. No simple task. And by singing beautifully in our soprano section. But her professional life began with a nursing career, which expanded into years of work in intensive care and hospice settings. To quote Meredith, her work offered invaluable experiences of seeing death as a wise teacher. She participated in extensive training in end-of-life programs in California and in the state of Washington, returning after 30 years to Michigan, her home state, where she is now a caregiver for managed senior care. And here at Fountain Street, you will have an opportunity for further exploration of how death can help us live our lives with greater fullness and meaning when Meredith facilitates the 5 Invitations spiritual practice group during 5 Tuesday evenings in October. Please join me in the responsive invocation. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die. You suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread.
When we label some deaths right, other deaths become wrong. When we label some deaths good, other deaths become bad. Living and dying create each other. The easy way and the difficult way are interdependent. A long life and a short life are relative. The first days and the last days accompany each other. Therefore, the true caregiver of the dying does all that needs to be done without asserting herself, and says all that needs to be said without saying anything. This happens, things happen, and she allows them to happen. Things fail to happen, and she allows them to fail to happen. She is always there, but it is as though she is not there. She realizes that she does nothing, yet all that needs to be done is done. In letting go, there is gain. In giving up, there is advancement. Do not practice controlling, practice allowing. Such is the mystery of happiness. Such is the mystery of wealth. Such is the mystery of power. Such is the mystery of living and dying. Let me leave behind
all that keeps me from being in this moment, in this time and place, be all I need to be. Let me be in this moment so I can clearly see this moment is asking of me.
For our prayer and meditation time, I've chosen one of my favorites. You've heard the secret that if you look in the back of the UU hymnal, you can find many, many, many wonderful readings. This is one of them. From arrogance, pompousness, and from thinking ourselves more important than we are, may some saving sense of humor liberate us. For allowing ourselves to ridicule the faith of others, may we be forgiven. From making war and calling it peace, special privilege and calling it justice, indifference and calling it tolerance, pollution and calling it progress, may we be cured. For telling ourselves and others that evil is inevitable while good is impossible, may we stand corrected. God of our mixed up, tragic, aspiring, doubting, and insurgent lives, help us to be as good as in our hearts we have always wanted to be.
One stick, two stick, the power of unity. An old man was dying and calls his people to his side. And he gives a short, sturdy stick to each of his many offspring, wives, and relatives. Break the stick, he instructs them. With some effort, they all snap their sticks in half. This is how it is when a soul is alone without anyone. They can easily be broken. The old man next gives each of his kin another stick and says, "Put your sticks together in bundles of 2s and 3s. Now, break these bundles in half." No one can break the sticks when there are 2 or more in a bundle. This is how I would like you to live after I pass on. The old man smiles. We are strong when we stand with another soul. When we are with another, we cannot be broken. Can I stand here for you?
May I use my heart as a gate. We may not need words, we may not need songs, we may only need our 2 hearts beating. Can I stand here for you? May I use my heart as a gate. We may not need words, we may not need songs, we may only need our 2 hearts beating.
Where the ocean meets the sand,
Here we stand with you, where the daylight meets the stars. Here we are with you, in this place beyond dreams. Only love is what it seems. Open hearts, open hands. Here we stand with you. Where the ocean meets the sand. Here we stand with you, where the daylight meets the stars. Here we are with you, in this place beyond dreams. Only love is what it seems. Open hearts, open hands. Here we stand with you.
Good morning. First thing I want to do is thank all of these people. Marilyn, they've got my back. That's why I asked them to sit up here. I met Linda in the social hall not long after I joined Fountain Street, and I think it was 2015, something like that. We were just sitting at the table having coffee, and I started to talk a little bit about being a hospice nurse in the past, and she said, "Oh, you might be interested in the Threshold Choir." And I knew about the Threshold Choir, so I'm very grateful for what that community has provided for me, it's another place to practice being with people, right, in difficult times. So I want to read that line from that last story that Linda just read. We are strong when we stand with another soul. When we are with another, we cannot be broken. So I stand here today with a grateful heart for being amongst family and friends who give me strength with their love, and for this opportunity to share some of my story with you. Thanks, Mary Lou, for asking me. I believe the giving and receiving of our stories is one of the most powerful ways in which we weave our lives together. So I want to begin with a story, a true story. At least it conveys my truth about the experience of what happened almost 20 years ago. I really have no way of knowing if the story would resonate with Don, a man whose brief time in my life has left a memory that continues to offer lessons each time I bring it to mind and heart. Early in my work with hospice, Don came to live out his last days at our hospital's hospice residence. Actually, it was in Lansing, Michigan. He arrived soon after his wife's death from cancer, and it was apparent that his cancer had progressed to the end stages. He was thin and frail and had symptoms that were distressing to him and very difficult to manage. His children lived out of state. His friends helped him move a few of his most precious belongings into his room, and perhaps most loved was his stereo system and his favorite jazz recordings. Oh, how we loved to listen to his jazz recordings. As with all the people who came to us for care, we took the time to discuss what was most important to him. And it became clear that the thing he valued most was maintaining as much independence as possible. This included the very simple things like getting out of bed and getting into the bathroom. You know, things that most of us take for granted. And given his frail state, we were concerned that he might fall and injure himself. We were practicing controlling there, right? How can we control and prevent an injury? But instead, we decided to allow, and we honored his wishes, and he managed to move about his space without falling. His appetite was poor, but he loved sipping on his cup of tea as he communed with his friends, and the warmth of the jazz music floated all around them. He quickly became beloved to all of us. He was a retired professor, and he had dearly loved his life in academia. He valued quiet conversation. I recall him asking me for guidance, probably on more than one occasion, with, how do you do this thing we call dying? And he indicated he wasn't able to find a logical answer as to how to do it. Now, it was easy for me to operate out of the part of me that wanted to be able to help. So I offered some advice. I shared my expertise in an attempt to make it somehow easier for him and probably for myself, right? I was practicing controlling there, and it was coming more from a place of doing for rather than being with. And while it isn't wrong to educate or share the knowledge we may have, interactions that are based solely on a role filled with expectations can limit our ability to be present as a whole person. It certainly can create a barrier to more authentic dialogue. We did our best to ease his distressing symptoms, but his cancer progressed and he grew weaker, spending more time in bed sleeping. Now, one day I found him on his hands and knees, looking under his bed. And I asked if I could be of help, and he answered me, "I'm looking for my suitcase. It's time to pack to go." Now, some people would say he was confused. Some might even call that delirium. But most who work in hospice experience this as him communicating that something was changing for him. A transition was happening. So we talked a bit about what he thought he needed to pack for where he was going. And not long after that day, I was leaving the residence in the evening after a full day of caregiving. We worked 12-hour shifts in our unit. It was dark. I was ready to go home. And as I was passing by his room, he emerged out of the darkness and literally fell into my arms. He was sobbing and somehow managed to whisper, "I don't know how to do this." I was startled, first of all, because I was heading home, and it kind of disrupted my path, right? But I was most startled by his rawness, his fragility, the lightness of his body in my arms. It was really much more like holding a child, fearful in the midst of a storm. And after assisting him back to bed and sharing what had happened with the evening staff, I sat by his bedside for some time, quietly assuring him that he was not alone. I recall offering that I trusted he would find his way to where he needed to go. Mostly I just sat in silence as he cried and he finally drifted to sleep. Now here I think I practiced that allowing. And I was more able to receive his grief with an open heart. And that proved to be my last time with him. He died several days later. So what are some of the lessons we learned from this cherished encounter of mine? First of all, it helped me realize how strong my need was to fix things, to be the expert, the good nurse, and about the habitual ways I respond to feeling helpless or inadequate. His expression of vulnerability resonated with my own, and that's one that comes from simply being human. When he fell into my arms, it was the most intimate and visceral lesson about being exposed and unguarded. And these questions arise. They're questions we could explore together as a loving community, and we could spend hours answering them. How do we hold each other in such times and provide stability? How do we experience resilience in the face of such suffering? What are some of the habitual ways we mask our vulnerability? How do we practice allowing rather than controlling? Early in my career as a nurse, though seen as a leader and put in the charge nurse role, that's what they called it back 30 years ago. I don't know what they call it now. I even got into some management positions, but I experienced a great deal of stress and anxiety. I was fearful of making a mistake or missing something that was important. I felt overwhelmed with all that I saw that needed to be done. And in an environment where death was more often than not seen as a failure, indeed the enemy, it was easy to fall into that pit of fear of somehow contributing to someone's death or distress. I often left my work shift exhausted, depleted, burdened with the sense that I was not enough. With my focus on all that I felt responsible for, I often missed the opportunity to come from a place that I now call being responsive to. That's a place of service. Big shift when you make that transition. And still in the midst of all the busyness of all of those work shifts and the feelings of being burdened, I recognize that the encounters with death were a gift. And there were many such encounters in all the years of being a bedside nurse. I was being invited into a holy space. And even those that were chaotic and messy, and there were a lot of those, the ones that would get labeled as bad deaths. There was often a sense of suspension of time as I witnessed the last breaths of one in my care, sometimes with their loved ones present, oftentimes alone. It was sacred work, and it was ripe with opportunities for heart-centered service. Being with dying connected me to that thread that runs among things that change. I love that reading that we did of William Stafford's, the thread that runs among things that change. It connected me to the strength that comes when we make the choice to stand with each other in the midst of what may seem unbearable. Now, I've long had the sense that the universe provides me with what I need to grow and to learn. Over the years, I have learned how to recognize and trust my intuition more, to be more willing to follow my curiosity. Walking with my mom through her treatment for lymphoma and her death in 1996 provided the nudge to explore hospice nursing. And then in 1998, again, amidst the difficult time of a divorce and my younger brother's traumatic death, I transitioned from my work in the cardiac intensive care unit to one in the health system's new hospice unit. That, by the way, is a very common transition from intensive care to hospice for nurses. Interesting. The 5 years I worked in the hospice house, as well as the years that followed as part of the hospital's rapidly growing palliative care service, offered more glimpses into the mystery and the sacredness in the midst of dying. It also raised more questions for me: how to remain resilient while providing that sense of stability, how to continue to do my work and not burn out. This morning, I saw a post on Facebook about an article about the high level of moral distress that nurses carry in their work. Yeah. Then in 2008, I was fortunate to spend time with 25 other clinicians in an intensive training program that transformed the way I experienced life, as well as my work as a nurse and a caregiver. Led by wise teachers from Buddhist and contemplative traditions, we explored our relationship to dying and how death can teach us about living our lives with greater fullness, and yes, creating meaning in the midst of suffering. We engaged in challenging inquiry, both internally and with each other, as to how to be more fully present to what arises in the present moment. How to provide care that comes from that place of vulnerability and authenticity. Meditation practice was at the core of the training. We kept journals, gave attention to our dreams, allowed grief to arise and be expressed. And amongst those 25 clinicians, there were years of grief experiences that had never been expressed. We were reminded to be mindful of the ways we filled the uncomfortable silences, of the tendency to rush on to the next thing. We reflected on the ways we turn away from our own and others' suffering. We looked at how holding on to grievances burdened us, and at the freedom that can come with forgiving others as well as ourselves. The lessons learned in that year continue to transform my life in both subtle and profound ways. You see, I think that this idea of living in the present moment is the key to staying connected to that thread that runs through everything. The quote on the screen from Thich Nhat Hanh embodies this perfectly. Being with each other in the here and the now provides a home that's available to us wherever we are. When I practice this, I find a powerful way to connect with people. I find strength and stability in the midst of uncertainty and suffering. Indeed, with all the many ways I encounter pain, death, and loss. Starting with following my breath, and that's my ever-present anchor. It's an anchor for all of us. When in doubt, take a deep breath. Get into your body again. I'm able to bring my whole self into that experience. That includes what's going on in my mind, my thoughts, but also what's happening here and what my body is telling me about what's happening. And that enables me to provide a more loving witness to what arises. I find I am enough, and I am not alone. I can walk with others to impart a sense of safety, of being cherished. And when I sense my connection to that thread, I can risk unmasking my vulnerability. I can be more aware of my habitual responses. They don't go away, they're still there. But I can breathe through that urge to rescue or fix when it's not the thing that's needed. I can sense when it's time to pause. Take a time out. Practice self-care. And I experience being part of an ever-growing tapestry. One, in the words, one of my favorite Carole King songs, one of rich and royal hues. This call to walk with each other does not require perfection. Thank goodness, right? In reality, our wounds and weaknesses are as essential to our ability to be open to suffering as are our strengths and our expertise. We walk with each other with hearts that have been softened by our experiences of grief and loss. And we indeed become those bundles of sticks that cannot be broken. Now, this way of being with each other, particularly in the midst of loss and difficult moments, does not happen magically. Oh, I wish. I've often wished for that magic wand that could just make it easier, right? But as is said so often in the chapel services here, it takes a willingness to be intentional and to practice. And we have each other to help us do just that. And in the words from one of the Threshold Choir songs we sang today, we may not need words, we may not need songs, we may only need our two hearts beating. I was blessed to be able to learn more about this in my time at Enzo House, a hospice home on Whidbey Island, Washington. I went there again this summer for a month to kind of hang out. That's where that picture came from, right after a whale watching tour. It was, I looked up at those clouds and the sun coming down and I went, wow, this is heaven. Over the course of my year and a half there at Enzo House, along with Dr. Ann, the monks from the Sogenji Monastery in Japan, as well as many other dedicated volunteers, I was able to experience being a round-the-clock caregiver to 9 guests who came to live with us as they were dying. One of the things that first attracted me Enzo House, which I found out about on Facebook, was that they used the word guests. Big shift in our thinking. They're guests, not patients, right? Their loved ones often resided with us, and being with all of them offered me practice in sensing the right balance between listening and judicious sharing of my knowledge. I gained more insight into the reciprocal nature of this work, how we grow as a result of risking vulnerability and remain resilient as a result. A few of the guests I met at Enzo House come to mind. With Sue, I learned that my need to fix and control was still very strong, as I witnessed her not so gentle into that good night death, and it was not gentle. I struggled with being present to her suffering, defaulting to judgment that what was happening was bad. I distanced myself from what was unfolding, and I focused on the being responsible for, feeling that in some way I had failed her. I wanted her death to be easier for her, but mostly I think I wanted it to be easier for me. And as I mentioned, some habits are really difficult to break. Our gentle guest named Song shared his mostly unspoken, dignified process of letting go of his lifelong role of being protector for his extended family. In his quiet process of dying, I learned more about the power of silence as you sit in vigil, when it may appear as if nothing is happening. When he slipped away ever so gently, the room was filled with a deep peace and stillness. And then dear one, Jenny, little silver-haired lady, she gave me the gift of experiencing unconditional love. Love that extends far beyond personality and ego. Sitting in vigil with her, she gazed into my eyes and told me, "I love you." And I knew this was not about loving the personality named Meredith. She was speaking from the place of being held in the presence of the holy, the divine, which surrounds us all the time and cradles us in grace. And now in my work as a caregiver with elders in our community, I'm walking the path of aging with my clients and their families. My own aging as well. I am blessed with many moments of joy and laughter in this work. However, there is a grief that arises as your body tires and you face the loss of independence, asking you to say goodbye to things you never imagined you would have to lose. Many contend with boredom, loneliness, feelings of worthlessness, and they are hungry for someone to listen to them and receive their stories of their precious memories and their sorrows. And perhaps you may have to listen to the same story over and over again. Irene, one of my elderly clients who died at home in hospice care earlier this summer, voiced this often as I provided care for her daily needs. I never could have imagined that it would be like this. Nor could I. As I observe what arises as I provide care, the power of the witness that is guided by love continues to inform, and yes, still surprises me. And I am filled with gratitude for all who have blessed me by allowing me to be part of such intimate times. They have been my teachers, and they remain in my heart. So I'd like to close with these words from one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver. To pay attention, this is our endless and proper work. Hear that again. To pay attention, this is our endless and proper work. To be in the here and the now requires our attention, which can be so difficult in a world filled with endless distractions. As we walk with each other on our journey to our true home, may we bring our loving attention and presence to whatever may arise. And may we be ever aware of that thread that connects us, and of our strength in being with each other, and in the process, create a greater sense of community. Thank you for your kind attention today.
We are all just walking each other home. We are all just walking each other home. We are all just walking each other home. We are all just walking each other home.
If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace.